So welcome, I'm Brittany Pruitt-Fletcher. I'm the President and CEO of United Way of North Carolina. I'll tell you just a little bit about my journey. I went to school at Appalachian State University. My undergrad was in social work. I moved to Winston-Salem and worked for Big Brothers Big Sisters for about 8 years. I started as a case manager and ended there as a program director. They're a mentoring organization, so they place children in the community that need a positive role model with a mentor that spends time with them one-on-one once a week, and we say for 12 months. However, once you're big, you're always big. We don't put that part in the original script because no one would ever sign up, but I was matched with my little brother whenever he was 12. He is 23 now, about to be 24 at the end of this month. So you don't ever get to stop being big. Little did we know. So did that until I finished grad school. So I went back to Appalachian State. They have a distance ed program in Winston-Salem. Did my first grad degree in public administration, and then added on to get a master's of business administration. And then I was welcomed into the United Way network in 2015. Started working at United Way of Davidson County in Lexington, North Carolina. And they're about a 2.5 person staff and raise about $1.234 million-ish. And then distribute that out to about 27 local community partners there. And then had the opportunity to go work at United Way of Forsyth County as their chief of staff for about 2.5 years before I had the opportunity to step into this role. October was 2 years ago, so now I lead United Way of North Carolina and get to partner with our 47 local United Ways. And I have to say, in all of my experience, I have had the best board. And I don't say that because my board chair is sitting in the room. I truly have had great working, engaged boards. And I've been very fortunate to come into situations where that exists. Now, what I know is that that is truly a blessing. That is not always the case, and most of the time it is not the case. I know with a lot of organizations that I interact with that we do a lot of conversations around board engagement, what we should be doing, maybe what we shouldn't be doing, and all of the things. So let's see. We are going to talk just a high-level overview of board governance structure and composition of the board operations and meetings, the board and executive director relationship, what a crucial role that is, and then just high-level strategic planning and oversight. So we'll start with board governance and just thinking about board governance, understanding the role of the board. Really, board governance involves the process and strategies that guide the organization's direction and control mechanisms, accountability and transparency, so making sure that whatever the policies and procedures are, whatever the bylaws say, that is what we're doing. And so I always tell my new CEOs that are coming on board in the United Way Network, the very first thing is, where are your bylaws? And they look at me and they're like, oh, well, such and such told me they're old and they need to be revised. Well, for right now, that is your document. That is your guide. That tells you really what the structure needs to be, how often your board needs to be meeting, what defines a quorum for your board, how many board members you should have on your board, if there's specific positions that you should have on your board. For United Way of North Carolina, we have local United Ways on our board of directors, as well as public sector, as well as private sector. We don't have a certain number of each of those, but in certain cases there are You have to have a school representative. You may have to have someone from the public sector representing. And so all of that should be laid out in your bylaws. And that is part of the board's responsibility, is to make sure that you are being held accountable to your bylaws. One of the recent changes that I see happening with bylaws is around annual meetings. So generally, there is some kind of requirement in there that you do a public general session where you're kind of announcing what your financial statements look like, giving an overview of what your year in review might look like. I see a lot of that changing. Usually that happens within the first 3 months of the end of your fiscal year. But I'm seeing a lot of folks kind of transitioning away from that and either changing the timeline for it or incorporating it into some other kind of meeting. I think just culture has shifted. We've sort of moved away from having a formal annual meeting with very structured report outs. And so that's one of the most recent bylaw changes that I'm seeing happen a lot with our local United Ways is how can they still have that level of transparency and accountability, but the attendance at annual meetings was starting to decline, and it's like, okay, what's the best return on our investment here? Should we be doing this? And then, as Brian talked about this morning, guiding the organization's mission, making sure that there's not mission creep, that oftentimes we see dollar signs and we think, oh, we should go after that money. Well, that money is to fund something that has absolutely nothing to do with our organization. And so how do we make sure that we're in alignment and not creeping away from our mission? Board members have a unique role that includes oversight, ensuring financial stability, supporting the organization's mission, and understanding that all of these roles are vital to the board's success. So legal and ethical obligations. So fiduciary duties. Does anyone know what the 3 fiduciary duties of nonprofit board members are? Duty of care. And so this means that board members must take good care of the nonprofit by making informed decisions and ensuring the organization's resources are used wisely. And so an example of this would be attending board meetings regularly and reviewing financial statements to make sure the nonprofit is financially healthy. So that's duty of care. Duty of loyalty. And this is board members must always act in the best interest of the nonprofit, putting the organization's needs above their own or their personal or professional interest. For instance, if a board member owns a company that could benefit from a contract with the nonprofit, they should disclose this through a conflict of interest form and recuse themselves from making any decision-making process. And so most of the time we require our board members to sign a conflict of interest form. And again, it doesn't mean that there cannot be a conflict of interest. It doesn't mean that Brian can't serve on my board and also a local United Way board. You might see that as a conflict of interest. It just means if we're discussing that local United Way or we're making a business decision around that local United Way, then he would need to recuse himself from being part of the decision-making process. And we say the same thing. We have our staff sign a conflict of interest form as well, and ask them to disclose any potential conflicts of interest. And for us, we run a call center, and so some of our employees are working multiple jobs. So we ask them to disclose that to us because we never know who we might be going into business with. And so we want to make sure that if there is a potential conflict of interest, that we are aware and that it can be disclosed. We can write it all out, and if we need to make any changes in the way we move forward with decision making, then we do that. And then the last one is a duty of obedience. And this duty requires board members to ensure that nonprofits follow applicable laws, regulations, and bylaws, as we've already mentioned. An example would be making sure that nonprofit files its annual tax returns on time and adheres to the mission statement when planning new programs. So duty of care, duty of loyalty, and duty of obedience. Fiduciary duties.
That should be in the bylaws?
It's not necessarily part of your bylaws, but whenever I do a new board member orientation, I have a document that lists these out. It lists exactly what they mean, and I have the board members sign their fiduciary duties. So this is literally what they are legally obligated to do for your nonprofit as a board member. So board structure and composition. We know that an optimal board size allows for diverse perspectives while ensuring effective decision making. Diversity within the board creates or enhances creativity, representation, and overall effectiveness. One of the things, let me see, this is like my notes, and this is where this is my computer up here. So I'm going to pause this for just 1 second. So one of the things that I use is a matrix that looks like this. And I have a little survey that goes along with it. And so at the top, I would put board member names up here. And then there's a survey that I send out to them. And then they tell me what their competencies are. And so if they view themselves as a strategic thinker, if they connect leaders to leaders, advocate for community, if they're future focused, execution of plans, accountability for goals and results, and a steward of brand and trust, then I would put a little X in this box. And then that would help me identify kind of what areas are missing for the board. Same thing with influence, access to resources, legislators, community leaders, national influencers, content experts. And we should probably update this to say, where are we now? Alpha, almost to beta generation. But access to younger generations. As I have most recently been told, I am now older. I also asked them to identify their skills and experience. So finance, human resource, legal, information technology, marketing, fundraising, public policy, and I'll send this to you guys if you want. Nonprofit philanthropy, government, equity lens, mental health service, or entrepreneurship. And then what sector do they represent? And then I asked them to identify demographics, information. And then for us, this is just what location of the state they're in, because we want to make sure that we have statewide coverage. And then what committees do they represent? And then I added in the board term end year when their term ends. So I could use this as I'm thinking about recruiting new board members. If the only person that I have on the board that is in government is rotating off next year, if they've served their 2 terms, then I know I need to start thinking about someone from the government sector to come on board. And then what I usually do is use the second sheet and I list out the board terms. We'll see if it's actually there. No, okay. I didn't think so, but our board can have, we have a very wide range. We can have as little as 14 and as many as 50. That's what our bylaws say right now. We've talked about, should we update that? I personally like to have a board of about 30, and that's because we have 3-year terms, and I can put 5 and 5. This is if it was a beautiful, perfect world and it all worked out the way that I like it in my head. 5 on their first term, 5 on their second term. So generally, I would be bringing in about 5 new board members each year and keeping about 25 folks the same. I just find that easiest to keep up with. You don't have to have that many. I know 30 can seem like a lot, especially if you're a smaller organization. But I do like to break them up. For us, it's easy because it's 3-year terms. So 10, 10, and 10, and then having those 5 kind of rotate in and out. That's also something that you want to check your bylaws for to see what are your board terms and how many consecutive terms can a board member serve before they have to rotate off. And then do you have any special provisions that say if someone brings a special skill or asset to the table that they could continue serving? So our bylaws give us that caveat. We have someone right now that is leading one of our committees and has just been a phenomenal board member. She still brings a lot to the table. She technically completed her second term, but we don't have anyone to replace her skill set and what she brings to the table. So we have the caveat that we could offer her an additional year. And so it can only be a 1-year term. The board votes the same as they would for any other member to come on or to extend their term. How many folks have ever had to have a conversation with a board member that their term is over and they have to rotate off the board now? Or how many people have come into an organization where no one knows what term they're in? They don't know. Some people have been serving for 25 years and you're like, I know that our bylaws cannot say that the terms last for 25 years. So that's something to check out in your bylaws. What are the terms and what are the term limits? So usually you have a term last 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, and then you have a limit on the number of consecutive terms that they can serve. So our bylaws say we have 3-year terms and they can serve 2 consecutive terms with the caveat unless they bring a special skill. You also have officers of your board, and so your officers, when they're serving as an officer, does that tenure count as a term, as part of their term limit, or does it not? For us, it does not. So Brian has been my board chair last year, this year, so 2 years board chair as my board chair. Those 2 years do not count toward the 6 consecutive years that he could stay with us. I know he's so excited to spend more time. So just something to think about and to make sure that you are aware of. And leaning on the bylaws is a great way to have those conversations, especially coming in. I know when I came into Davidson County, that was something that really wasn't being paid very much attention to. And I remember meeting with the board member one-on-one. We had a great conversation. We had a great engagement around where the organization was going. And then I had to tell him that his second term was coming to an end and he would need to rotate off the board. And he's like, are you serious? Like, we just spent the last hour like hyping me up about where we're going as an organization, and now you're telling me I have to rotate off? And so sometimes that is a good thing. Like, having new perspectives, bringing new voices to the table, that can be a really, really good thing. Sometimes you are losing a really powerful voice that you need or want at the table. And in that situation, it's a smaller community. I wasn't from there, and so I needed as many advocates saying this was the right decision, United Way is under good leadership, as I needed as many advocates as I could have there. So it was really tough for me to say, you have to step away, because he really believed in where we were going. So we added him to a committee. And let me go back. Let me go over here so I can't navigate that way. I don't know, my brain does not do that. Okay. All right, so then that takes us to committees and their functions and focuses. So we added him to, one of our committees. And so he stayed engaged with United Way, was still able to help us kind of lead the change that we were planning on leading, but he wasn't part of the official board. He was on a committee. So again, your bylaws will tell you what committees you have, So that's important to know. And then what are the structures of those committees? What your bylaws probably will not tell you is what does the charter for those committees look like? And this is actually something that we're working on at United Way of North Carolina right now, is what should be the frequency for how often they meet? What are the functions and responsibilities of those committees? How does their work align to our strategic plan and our objectives there? Like I said, I came into this role 2 years ago, and we had a pretty solid committee structure in place, and they were sort of already in the middle of some pretty big projects. And so I feel like now, 2 years in, a hurricane later, we definitely are at a place where those big projects are kind of coming to an end. And I've heard my committee say, like, okay, now what? Where do we go from here? What's our next thing? And so we've spent some time at a board retreat, which I would highly recommend if you're not doing a board retreat with your board members. Pull them together, let them get to know one another, have some fun together. That was one of the biggest lessons that I learned as a new CEO coming into Davidson County. As they were very used to having someone stand in front of them and just report out. And they were silent. They never gave me any feedback. They never disagreed about anything that I said. I'd never been a CEO before, and so I'm like, are you, like, do you like this? You don't like it? Like, don't just go with it because I'm standing here saying, like, this is what I think. Like, our job as CEOs is to give the board the information, to give them all of the facts. This is the pros, this is the cons. Whatever the recommendation may be, you may make a recommendation. Don't take it personal whenever they start talking, when they start asking questions. That's a beautiful thing. And we had to get our board to be engaged in that way in Davidson County because they were not used to that level of engagement. They were not used to getting to speak or give feedback. And I learned that part of that was trust a little bit with one another, because one-on-one, they were fantastic. They would tell me anything that we needed to know, anything I needed to know. They would give me feedback. They would talk about changes that we needed to make. But when we got into a big room together, they would not say anything, even though I knew, like, y'all all agree on this. Like, we all agree. They would just be silent. And so we spent a lot of time just helping them build relationships with one another. That's definitely something that I noticed is they would come together, but even though it's a small community, like, they may not know one another. And so getting them sort of grounded and all on the same page and engaged in that way was really, really important. Same thing with your committees. Our board bylaws allow us to have board members on the committee and then also folks that may not serve on our board. So depending on what we're talking about, we may pull in experts from other places. We may pull in more local United Way members, depending on what the topic is. If we're talking about 211, which Brian mentioned, our information and referral, we may bring in partners from the state. We're part of the state emergency response team, so we may bring them in to make some decisions with us or recommendations to the board. But utilizing your committees, that's truly where the work happens. That is where the magic happens. So if you don't have committees, don't be afraid of them. It does add work because now there's another meeting that we have to have on the calendar. Identifying strong chairs or a co-chair model for your committees. We have found that works really, really well because then you have two people that are holding each other accountable, and it sort of takes the pressure off of the staff liaison to constantly be following up and saying, hey, what about this? What do we need to do here? Okay, board operations and meetings. So effective, let me get my slides on the right thing here. Okay.
Someone was on the board
Yes.
to be a part of the committee?
Oh, yes, certainly. So we have probably at least 2 or 3 board members on every committee. Our committee chairs are on the board, and during our board meetings, we actually have the committee chairs always making the report outs. That was something that was a little different in Davidson County, is staff was always reporting out and really reporting on all the things that we had done. We've gotten in this same habit at United Way of North Carolina. We report out on all the things that we have been doing. It's my goal for this year that we back away from that a little bit. Not because we want to make sure the board is informed, but really the most instrumental thing that they can do is help you plan for the future and have strategic and forward-thinking conversations of how things that are happening in the world are going to impact your nonprofit, and how can you be prepared for those things and not reactionary to them. And so hopefully by the end of this year, we'll have a little bit different structure of our meetings. And so making sure that we build in time for some futures thinking. I have done a program through United Way Worldwide that is through the Institute for the Future, and we talk a lot about drivers and signals of change. And so how are things that are happening today, how are trends that are happening in all sectors going to impact the nonprofit sector? Same thing so those will be the drivers. Signals are those things that happen and you're like, that's never happened before. Or, it might be a little alarming. It might be a little scary. But those are the little things that will be driving our future eventually. And so some of it's just noise and we just weed that out. But sometimes those are truly signals of change, and it is going to impact our work. And so we want to make sure that, yes, we're keeping the board informed. Yes, we have conversations with them about the things that we're doing, but it's already done. That's what yes. No.
You move on. You mentioned that you have retreats.
Yes.
So when you go, do y'all plan out? So I used to be a teacher, and we would plan out for the year. How does your retreat look?
So we do our retreat at the same time as our state conference. So we had our state conference last week, and then we do a board retreat and a board meeting the next morning. This year we spent time really thinking about future driver signals, what's impacting our local United Ways, what's going to impact us as a state organization. It is 1 to 5. It was 1 p.m. to 5 p.m. We did not bring on, we voted in that meeting to bring on 2 new board members, but they weren't there. And so the structure of our board didn't change. I think we have a pretty tight-knit board already. If that was not the case, if I was bringing in new board members, then the past 2 years, we've done some kind of little personality assessment. So one year I did the colors, and then on their name tags, I gave them a little dot that was their color personality. So were they red, they blue, they yellow, or they green? And we talked about what each of those things mean and how we might communicate with one another and what are the pros and cons. And then when we're around the board meeting and someone's being red, we know, they're red. That's why they're speaking with so much passion about this, not because they're yelling at me. Or if they're blue, then I may need to say, okay, Molly, what do you think about this? Because she may not be one that is just automatically going to speak up and say how she feels about something. Last year we did animal personalities. So were they a lion, an otter, a beaver, or a golden retriever? Now all of those could also align with their colors. Like if we put all the lions together, they're all the reds, right? But it was a fun way to get them to talk to one another, to get to know one another, and to start having, especially if you're going through change with your organization, if you're trying to do something that's different than you've done before and you have people resisting that, it is a great way just to break the ice. It is a great way for those passionate reds to say, okay, tone down the redness a little bit, tone down the roar a little bit, lion. Let's hear from the nice little sea otter over here. Like, how are you feeling about this? But it's fun. It helps kind of break the ice. It helps with engagement. Yes, it is team building, and it helps build the trust. And it gives you a kind and gentle way of saying things like, you're being really passionate about that, and I love the roar that's coming out right now. But, can we shift gears a little bit? Can we think about this from the golden retriever, friendly, happy perspective for just a second? So having regular meetings, having well-planned agendas, and then having timely discussions are all three really important factors. Your bylaws will tell you what your meeting cadence should be, how many times a year you have to meet. Depending on your organization, United Way's are federated organizations, so United Way Worldwide has standards that we have to meet. And so part of the standards is that we have to review financial statements at least once every 3 months. And so that's not written into our bylaws, but there's another accountability measure through United Way Worldwide. We check off that we do those things every year. Let me just do a quick time check. Okay. One of the most important things, and maybe the hardest thing, is board engagement and encouraging participation and maintaining focus. So this is what leads to an effective meeting. Like I said, if you're going in and you're just talking for an hour, you have just missed the greatest opportunity to use the brilliant brains in the room to help you drive the strategic direction of your board. And I probably speak more than I should at my board meetings, but truly, I would rather not say a word because I know what's in my brain. I need to know what is in their brains. I need for them to feed me and tell me. Making sure that you have voices from all perspectives around the table. And even if this isn't at your board, maybe this is at your committee level as well, thinking about timing of your meetings, especially when we're thinking about being inclusive of a variety of voices. If all of our board meetings are during the day and we're talking about an ALICE population and we want someone with lived experience, well, ALICE is probably working. ALICE probably cannot afford to leave work to come to a board meeting at 10 o'clock on a Thursday. And I'm calling us out there because our board meetings are at 10 o'clock on a Thursday. Offering optional ways to participate. So we really encourage folks to come in person, but we always offer a virtual option. And we talked about that when I first came, and it was like, well, if everyone's just going to choose the virtual option and not come in person, like, we don't want that scenario to happen. It's never happened. We've never had to worry about it. We said it whenever we made the decision to always offer a virtual option, that your in-person participation is what we would like to see. It's what's recommended. It's what's encouraged. But we also want a quorum. And so if that means you can't be here because you have to be somewhere else, that's okay. If you have the opportunity to invest in something called an OWL lab, this is nothing to do with board governance. This is personal preference, really. It's this little machine, and it looks like an owl. It has little owl eyes. When it comes on, it even says, woohoo! It is fantastic for these virtual meetings. It's so easy to set up, and sometimes we do not have lovely technology like this, and so we've been to some really, really nice places, and we've had to pull, we call her Alberta, and so we pull out Alberta and set her on the table and hook her up, and it's seamless usually. So it's so easy. She's a little pricey, but you can get refurbished ones on Amazon. So just something to keep in mind there if you're offering a virtual option, because I have to say, probably one of the most frustrating things is going to a meeting where there's a virtual option, but you can't hear the participants. Or isn't that so frustrating? I was in a meeting one day and I thought, if I was that virtual person, actually I called our communications person and said, can you bring Alberta to this meeting I'm in? Because this person, she was in Western North Carolina, she couldn't come to the meeting. I felt so bad for her. I'm like, we got to help them. We got to fix this situation for them. So we brought in our Alberta and set it up so we could have a productive meeting. Decision making and voting. So your quorum is also going to be outlined in your bylaws. It's going to tell you how many people need to be there in order for a vote to actually count. Making sure that there's clear procedures. So most folks, I don't know if this says anything about, no, Robert Rules of Order. We are using Robert's Rules of Order, making sure that if we need to vote on something, that there's a motion, that it's seconded, or if it's brought from a committee, that the committee is making the motion, that there's a second, everyone's in favor, if there's any discussion. Going into closed session, what does that mean? How often do you do that? Why would you do that? And so if there's things that you need to talk about or your board needs to talk about that maybe staff don't need to be in the room for, or it is a confidential, it's not for public display yet. Maybe it's a personnel issue. Then you may go into closed session, but you have to have a motion to go into closed session. Someone has to second it. Everybody votes, and then you need to determine, like, is it a closed session with staff or without staff? Most of the time, it's going to be without staff. Maybe your CEO will be there, kind of depending on what the issue is. But it is also okay for boards to have closed sessions without the CEO. And one of my dearest mentors, he's the CEO of RTI International, he actually said his board has a closed session every single time without him in the room, so it's not awkward for when you have to have those conversations or your board needs to have those conversations. Maybe it's about your performance, maybe it's about you. You know, and just because you're talking about your performance, it could be a great conversation. My board has gone into closed session and talked about my performance, and the end result of that has been fantastic. But it's always a little nerve-wracking because it's not a practice that we generally do. And so he made the recommendation one time that every single time your board go into closed session at the end, all the staff leave, and they may not have anything to discuss, or they may have something to discuss. It just gives them an opportunity to have that time without additional folks in the room. So something to consider. Any questions about voting, decision making? Yeah, no, it's okay, please.
Can they vote you out as the CEO?
Oh yes, the board is the only person that can hire and fire you. And you are the only person that the board should be hiring and firing. Ooh.
Well, what about if we write ourselves, have our amend to our bylaws that we can't be put up?
Is that possible?
I mean, I know we attended a class that it happened in Raleigh.
Oh.
And the lady she had been doing work by herself, and the community just was like, it's too much. We'll come in here, let's get your nonprofit. They got her set up, and then they put her out of her own organization. And they said it made the news or something.
Oh, wow.
And so this company that was helping people start nonprofits, they went back and they wrote her in that she couldn't be put out of her organization again because of that.
Interesting. So you could have a provision in there like the founding CEO or founding someone, but generally your board is legally responsible for the organization. And so that's part of their duties. It's also why you should have directors and officers liability insurance, because if your organization gets sued, they're suing the board of directors. They are legally responsible for the entity, and they are the governance oversight. And so one of their responsibilities is to hire and fire the CEO. Even if I started it, they are now the board. They are now the ones that are legally responsible for this organization. And so I think there has to be some kind of oversight there that allows them the ability to do that. Now, it could be with a vote of, like there could be some parameters as to what that vote needs to be. Maybe it's more than a quorum. Maybe it has to be a unanimous decision. So there can be parameters put in there, but the board is legally responsible for the organization. And so they should have the ability to bring in a CEO or to exit the CEO if they have to. But it's also really important that you sort of understand that balance of they hire and fire the CEO. So the CEO is the person that is responsible for the internal operations of the organization. And they are responsible for hiring their staff and for firing their staff. Sometimes there's a personnel committee. Most boards have a personnel committee, or it's part of an executive committee. And they may be a support to the CEO in decisions, in internal decisions, but ultimately it is the CEO's decision as to who is working on the staff. And the board can't come in and fire someone on your staff. They may advise you, and you get to make a choice. And again, they get to hire and fire you, so there may be consequences to the choices that we make, but they are not responsible for the staff. They're not responsible for the day-to-day operations of the organization. Sometimes I've taken things to the board just to get insight and feedback, and you have a healthy board when they look at you and say, this is an operational decision, and we're going to lean on you to tell us what works best for your operations. This is a you decision. Now, that's the very best thing that they could say. They will also give me feedback. They will also say, did you think about this? What about this? Did we consider this? What's the optics of this? And that's okay. Like, they should do that. I want them to do that. I would just encourage you, if your board is asking questions or giving you a perspective or bringing optics up, it's not personal. It's not, they might be, but they're not really questioning you as a leader. It is their job to make sure that they are making the right decisions for the organization. And if we take our CEO hat off and put our board hats on, then what questions would you ask? What questions would you want to know? What information do you want to provide to them? Or what information would you want provided to you in order to make this decision? And sometimes we think we come with like the best prepared presentation. We think we have answered all of the questions, and there is something that comes out of the blue, and we were not prepared at all to go down this road with these questions, and I did not even think about this perspective, and I did not bring any information or have I had any conversations about that. But that's the beauty in having those voices at the table and being a good partner with your board. So understanding the executive director's role, giving them the autonomy that they deserve as a respected leader of the organization. That is so vitally important. Understand what the board does have oversight for, and what are the things that they do need to be making decisions on. If there is policy change, that needs to go before your board. You need to be talking about those things, voting on those things, putting a timeline in place for implementation for those types of changes, making sure that there is just a healthy governance structure. Most of the time you're going to have your full board, you're going to have your committees, and you'll have an executive committee. And your executive committee is typically made up of any of your committee chairs and then your board officers. So board chair, vice chair, secretary, treasurer, and a past board chair. And again, those are all defined in your bylaws. Their terms are defined in your bylaws. So we have our board chair is for 2 years, which is really, really nice because as the CEO, you sort of get used to working with someone. You understand what their style is. They understand what your style is, what type of communication is expected. And you are just barely getting there at the end of year one. And so if you have to change every year, that's tough. It's also tough to ask someone for a 2-year commitment. But I personally think that it does help with just the flow of things. It takes a little bit of time for board members to kind of catch on and learn and start that engagement process. And so I recommend it. 2-year terms are usually good. For us, we may or may not have a vice chair for both of those years. Because if we ask the vice chair at the beginning, a 2-year term, and then to serve a 2-year term as the board chair, we're asking them for a 4-year commitment. That's a lot. We do last year, had one of our board members that was like, yes, I will do it. Even though I told her, like, you do not have to make the commitment to being the vice chair right now, but I knew that I wanted to tap her to be the chair, incoming chair. Thinking about succession planning with your board. So that goes a little bit back to the matrix that I was talking about, and thinking ahead and thinking strategically about when are their terms ending? Is it their first term ending or their second term ending? How many ever terms they can have on your board? How engaged are they? Do we feel like that this is someone that's really engaged, that just because they can serve 2 consecutive terms doesn't mean they have to serve 2 consecutive terms? Usually there's sort of this mutual agreement that happens. They've only been to half the meetings. They aren't coming to any committee meetings. They're really, really busy doing really incredible work over here. So being able to have just an honest conversation. Most of the time the board has come to me and said, Brittany, I can't give you what I need to give you as a board member. And so I'm going to step away. And so, okay, no hard feelings. Sometimes they may still be able to engage on a committee level. Sometimes they can't. And that's okay, because the world is tough and we have lots of things going on in our lives. So we've talked about most of this already, just having open communication, mutual respect, working toward a common goal. I often find if we're making hard decisions, then leveling ourselves, grounding ourselves in what are we here for? Starting with a mission moment that sort of gets us into the mind frame of this is what we're here to do. This is who we're here to serve. And we're going to have some really tough conversation today, and that's okay because it's going to get us to where we need to be. Performance evaluation and feedback, again, they're going to give you, as the CEO, they should be giving you feedback. They should be evaluating your performance. And then same for you to them. Like, you don't really get to evaluate their performance, but it is okay to have one-on-ones with your board members and give them feedback. And whenever I've done that, they love it. And they also tell me, like, we want to be more engaged. Tell us what we can do to help you. And I will be the first one to tell you I'm not great at that because it does take time. And it takes me to pause and think strategically about what do they bring to the table and how do we use them in the most effective way. But that is truly what they're there for, and that's truly how you move your organization forward. We've talked about strategic planning. There's some really fun ways to do strategic planning that doesn't have to be boring and long, and everyone's like, I'm not going to another strategic planning session with y'all. But my advice is engaging them in conversation, putting sticky Post-its up on the board, getting them in small groups talking to one another. We've done a lot of strategic planning that way. Again, their role in that being actively participating, providing insights. Those conversations that derail into something that I never thought about, those are the best conversations. Those are usually what opens my eyes to, I had a blinder there. And so while sometimes I can feel like, oh my gosh, like they really just beat me up. It really does. It really is like, no, Brittany, they do this because they respect you and they want what's best for this organization, and this gave you a perspective that you were not thinking about. And so I really do try to see it as a positive in that regard. Making sure that we are reporting back whenever we do have a strategic plan in place. What are our metrics? What are our goals? What are we trying to do? How are they holding us accountable? How can we grow and learn? What can we do better? That's the beautiful thing about life, is we get to grow, we get to learn, and we don't always have the answers to everything. And then establishing those metrics and reporting back out to them frequently so they understand. That's where we are with our board right now. Is we've made a lot of transition in the last 2 years. We brought our call center in-house. We've needed to make some changes in terms of our internal operations and how we could best serve 211 and improve some of our metrics. And so we do spend a lot of time now talking with our board about where we started the year and where we ended the year and the improvements that we have made, so they can sort of see how that committee work comes all back together, and that their efforts aren't lost. Okay, last slide here. So just knowing that board governance is so important. It's so important to where your organization is going, how long it's going to take your organization to get there. So important to change management. There are so many resources out there about best practices, guides for how to effectively run board meetings. Happy to share all of the things that I've come across. I just have a folder that I just keep stuff in. And then providing the strategic oversight and making sure that your mission is met with measurement and you can effectively achieve that. That's what we're there to do. So, what questions do y'all have?
You may not be able to answer directly, but does United Way fund grants or fund some way have a funding mechanism for hiring a strategic planner, board development / governance person to help us or help aid organization?
So every local United Way sets their own funding priorities. So you would have to check with your local United Way to know if that is something that they fund there or not. But Kate B. Reynolds is a charitable foundation out of Winston-Salem, and they do Kate B. Reynolds, or KBR, and that I haven't looked in a couple of years, but that was one of their priority areas. And I know when I was in Davidson County, they funded someone to come in and help us work on a strategic plan. You're welcome. KBR or Kate B. Reynolds Foundation, or Charitable Trust is what. Other questions?
In your board meeting, do you prioritize committee reports? What I've found, if we take committee reports prior to the meeting, we collect them, put them in a PDF document, and distribute to everybody. Is that an effective way to do it, or do you put some prioritizing model into a committee report? If it's just standard maintenance kind of thing, it's like, well, we have better time to do with it. Let's use our time better. This is just a maintenance issue.
Yep.
It doesn't really require a decision. They're just letting us know what we're doing. Do you do that with just a general distribution via email and just say, okay, that's how we're going to do it. We're going to move on to the more important thing?
So we do have a consent agenda.
Okay.
And a couple of things in our consent agenda. So our committees usually report out, but we have operational reports, which are some of the more mundane things like the board should know that these things are happening, but it's not something that we need discussion on. It's not something that we need a whole lot of feedback on. It's just letting them know that this has happened. So we put operational reports, we put minutes from the previous meeting, and then sometimes there's like one-off things that, you know, have come through that we just want to get to them. A flyer for something like that. We don't really need to discuss it. We just want them to be aware of it. We put all of that in a consent agenda. I do also send out a packet, an agenda packet, which would include the agenda, the consent agenda items, and then any report outs if I get them ahead of time. Sometimes I don't get them ahead of time from committees. But if I get them ahead of time from the committees, I'll go ahead and put that in there for them to review. I've not been so great at this since Helene, but pre-hurricane, the board could definitely expect to get the agenda packet before Monday morning, the week of the board meetings. So our board meetings are Thursdays at 10 o'clock, before Monday morning. I used to say Friday at noon, but yeah, I did really good for the first year. The second year might have tinkled into the weekend a little bit. But before Monday morning, I want them to have the agenda packet in their inbox. So they have a few days to review it before they come to the board meeting. Now, I'm not always great at that. Sometimes when you plan an annual conference and a board retreat and a board meeting and lots of other things, this past time, they might have gotten it 2 days ahead of time. But I do try to send it out to them ahead of time. So one, they can get their questions together. If we need to pull anything out of the consent agenda, then they can make a motion to pull something out of the consent agenda if they want to discuss it. I don't think that we've ever pulled anything out of the consent agenda. Yeah. And that's something that we started doing. I think when Brian became the chair, we started putting things in a consent agenda just to help us save time at the board meetings.
Well, I did attempt to do the minutes in the same manner, but I got pushback on that because the minutes hadn't been approved. I don't know if that's something you have to consider.
We vote to approve the items in the consent agenda. And so basically what we're asking them to do is to review those minutes before they come to the meeting, so we're not spending time at the meeting reviewing minutes. Now, sometimes we have, we thought, or we didn't add somebody in that came late. If they're virtual, sometimes that can be a little tricky to keep up with. And so they're like, oh yeah, I came, but maybe not when the attendance was taken. So we've had to add stuff in there. But other than that, we vote on the consent agenda and to approve those things as part of the official minutes.
Thank you.
Yep, you're welcome. Other questions? This is fun. I thought whenever I was growing up that I was going to be an elementary school teacher. And then I spent 20 hours in the classroom and I was like, no, that is not the life for me. So I always love getting to come and talk and engage and present. Another thing with our board meetings, so we have 5 board meetings a year. One of those is the retreat and the meeting. And then last year we did something a little different, and we're going to continue to do it this year, is one of our other meetings we actually will do, so we're statewide, so we have them all across North Carolina. Last year we went to Asheville and we had a board meeting. One of our corporate partners there hosted us. We did a dinner the night before, and then the next day we did a tour of his plant facility, and then we had the board meeting. And so again, we didn't have any formal retreat planned or formal meeting planned for the night before. We just came together for dinner, and again, just gave them an opportunity to engage and, fellowship with one another. And so we're going to do that again this year. We're going to come to the eastern part of the state. We're not exactly sure where we're going to be, but we're going to come to the eastern part of the state. We'll come together on Wednesday night. We'll fellowship, have dinner, just have some casual time together, because we don't really get to do that. I mean, they come in the board meeting, you sit down, and we start, right? So I would also encourage that if there's opportunities for casual fellowship, it also just helps build the camaraderie among the board. So, all right. Thank y'all so much. I hope you have a great day and enjoy the rest of the summit.